kind of had a question for Bailey, but maybe Heather could answer this one too. Regarding submissions where there are 3 or fewer approved, you said when there's a blocking patent, you can't have a P3 or P4 regardless of litigation. If there was no litigation, let's say it was settled before it's even filed, is that still going to be considered a blocking patent? Okay. Okay, easy enough.
Oh, yes, it's still considered a blocking patent because it's listed in the Orange Book as unexpired. So it's still, even his question was if there's no suit, it's still blocking. So that might qualify under the P4.
Right.
That would probably qualify under, it depends on the status of 180-day, but that does happen a lot. We see them just put the wrong factors, but your example would probably qualify under the P4 application with the P4 certification.
And then if my understanding of the MAPP is right, you can file a method of use certification though to a blocking patent, and that, I think there's a little footnote in the MAPP that says that.
Then it's not a blocking patent,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, if it's been carved out, right? We might have to get back to you on that.
No problem. Thank you.
Right, because that's not a paragraph 4. So that does count. If you have a section 8, that qualifies. Yeah.
Adding some excitement to the afternoon. Thank you. Second question, please, sir. Good afternoon. I have a general question regarding the Orange Book. Lately, it was noticed some RLD additional strengths have been added that were not previously there. What is driving this? It seems some of these RLD new strengths have the original RLD approval date.
So your question is asking why are we adding new RLDs?
No, more specifically additional potencies. For example, I have an application that has 2 potencies, and all of a sudden, last year, it now has 3 in the RLD. And it's even not in the PSG.
Yeah, I guess just in general, the Orange Book is constantly looking at the RLD itself, and some of these, I guess, RLDs may have different volume size or so forth. So we're looking at that, and that's why you're probably seeing the expansion of like strength and so forth. So, I mean, that's one scenario that I can see. But if you have a specific example, like, question for a specific RLD, you can email the Orange Book.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anyone else? Anyone else in the room? Okay, let's move on to online, please, Corey.
Of course, our first one is going to be for Commander Fine. The question is a suitability petition required when an ANDA applicant proposes to use a container closure system that differs from the reference listed drug, or RLD? For example, if the RLD is supplied in a vial, can a generic product be submitted in a pre-filled syringe without filing a suitability petition?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So the short answer is it depends, and I'll explain why it depends. So a container closure change by itself is not a petitionable change in a suitability petition, but what is a petitionable change that could impact this question is a strain change. So a strain change, especially for injectables, is defined as concentration and total drug content. So if you are proposing a different container closure system that has a different total drug count, for example, or a different concentration as the RLD, that would require a suitability petition prior to submitting an ANDA. But if your product has a different container closure system, but has the same strength and the same same strength and same concentration, that would not require a suitability petition, and that type of change could be submitted as an ANDA.
Thank you, Andrew. I forgot my manners. I have to introduce our newest addition to the panel, and that is Dr. Rosie Pagaduan, and she is the Supervisory General Health Scientist at the Office of Regulatory Operations within the Office of Generic Drugs. Welcome, Rosie, to the panel. Okay, we do have a question in-house, please.
Great presentations today. I was just wondering, with regards to the general discussions of the maximum daily dose and some of the strength and dosage changes, whether or not there have been additional studies required from the investigators. For example, in a lot of cancer drugs, when they're testing the initial dosages required for potency, there are effective concentration EC50 and IC50 determinations, whereas in those cases, your IC50 might be higher than your EC50 as compared to other medications, for example, like ACE inhibitors and ARBs, whereas if you set the same MDD, the toxicity is going to be reached for ACEs before it's reached for ARBs. Additionally, in some other medications, such as diuretics, there's new research stating that you have epigenetic level changes, which are going to be significantly at lower doses likely than even at anywhere near the toxic dose or the MDD, whereas things like eplerenone, for example, can EZH2 can reduce EZH2 expression. So I think when considering the full spectrum of efficacies, inhibitory concentrations, maximum daily dose determinations, and also like lethal dose considerations, what level of evidence have you all considered that's required for a lot of these new pharmaceuticals, as well as some of the old generic drugs, to validate the level of toxicities and the range of effects they can have within the human body, as well as some of the animal studies before that?
Thank you. No, it's a great question. Unfortunately, like the technical components of like applying appropriate MDD for the scenarios you're describing, we don't have the expertise on this panel to answer that question. If you have a specific MDD question and how it's going to be applied and like some of the details you provided, that there's avenues to submit and get some feedback about the appropriate MDD to use and how you're applying that MDD. So I would just advise that you could submit a controlled correspondence with some of the details if it's application specific that will allow you to get the best advice possible.
Thank you. This was just in general in terms of making sure that there's essentially dosing and strength equity for a lot of the patient populations, because that's required. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Corey.
All right, our next question will be for Rosie. Can a product with multiple strengths approved under 2 different suitability petitions be approved in one ANDA?
Thank you. That's a great question. So the short answer is yes. However, you do want to ensure that both of those suitability petitions reference the same RLD. And then you would cite both of those petitions in your ANDA as the basis of submission along with the RLD.
All right, and then my next question will also be for you, Rosie, as well. Are suitability petitions subject to GDUFA user fees, or are they fee exempt?
Suitability petitions themselves are exempt from user fees, but of course, once an ANDA is submitted, that ANDA is subject to GDUFA fees, user fees.
One simple question. For an injectable product, is a suitability petition always required for change in fill volume, or are there situations where it can be managed through a change control?
So for injectables, Andrew somewhat touched on this, but yes, a change in fill volume would require a suitability petition if the RLD does not have that fill volume. So parenteral products are a little weird in a sense where it could be a change in total drug content, which would be the change in fill volume, or a change in the concentration itself. So that would require a suitability petition.
Okay, anyone else in the room? Okay.
Is there any plan to update the list of suitability petitions on FDA's website, or it's always through regulations.gov, which is very difficult to kind of navigate?
I agree with you there. It is a little challenging to navigate regulations.gov. One tip is to, you want to type in that petition number exactly in order for it to pull up if you're looking for a particular docket. As you mentioned, some folks may not be aware that there was a database or a log of suitability petitions at one point in time. It hasn't been updated in quite a while, and we've gotten this request from industry. It's something that we are looking into because it would be beneficial for industry to see all the approved suitability petitions. It could promote, further ANDA submissions. So that is something we'll take back.
Thank you, Rosie. Corey, please, online.
Of course, our next question is going to be for Heather. So if I select multiple prioritization factors because we believe they all apply, will FDA review all of them?
So we will review all of them. I'm sort of answering for Bailey, I guess. We will review all of them, although only one is needed to get priority review, and having it being meeting criteria for multiple isn't going to get you any extra benefit, I suppose.
I see. Thank you for that. And then one more question for you, Heather. Why do I need to send notice of PIV certification to later listed use codes for a patent that we were already granted a license to?
Short answer is that there's not an exception in the CFR for not having to do so. So anytime you submit a P4 certification to a new use code, even if that patent has been litigated in the litigation, you have a settlement agreement and you have a license to that, you still have to send your notice and comply with the reg, just simply because there's not an exception not to.
All right. This next question will be for Truong here. Does discontinued status marked for any RLD in Orange Book always mean withdrawn status, or sometimes discontinued status means that they are not having market availability of that product anymore for reason other than the safety aspect of that product? When does the RS assigned to some generic products for those types of cases? Could you give an example?
When RLDs are discontinued, or even if an ANDA is discontinued in the discontinued section, it's more of a likely because of a marketing status change. And once an NDA gets discontinued, of course, as I mentioned, the reference standard and therapeutic codes gets. Oh, sorry. It gets dropped, and then we would reassign that reference standard to an therapeutic equivalent ANDA if there's one available.
Excellent. Thank you for that. This next question is, what is the typical response time for Orange Book email inquiries? Also for you, Truong.
We hope to do that within a reasonable time. Usually we say 7 to 10 days. If you email it, if it's more of a complex, then it might take longer, and we'll let you know if we need a follow-up.
Excellent. Then my next question will be for Commander Fine. Why would firms go for a suitability petition pathway over a 505(b)(2) route? Thank you.
I can't answer what a firm would do, but I will say that just as a point of clarification and just make sure we're on the same page. So a change that, the allowable changes under suitability petition, each of those changes are also suitable to come in as a 505(b)(2) because they differ from the RLD and they're not pharmaceutically equivalent. So a firm has that choice. Well, if I want to, if we took the example from my presentation, that fluoxetine 30 milligram capsule, we approved that as a petition, a suitability petition, and ANDA can now come in under, an applicant come in under an ANDA citing the RLD as well as the approved petition. Alternatively, that applicant could also submit that same change 30 milligram capsule as a 505(b)(2). The answer to all your questions is often money. So traditionally, the ANDA pathway is more affordable and allows access to an easier access to some of these changes versus some of the maybe uphill challenges, whether it's financial, others that were required for a 505(b)(2). So it's really applicant specific on what pathway is preferred for you. But again, both those changes could come in as either a petition ANDA referencing a petition of an approved petition or as a 505(b)(2).
Okay, any questions in-house? We still have some time. Okay.
Under suitability petitions, you had some information about when PREA is waived and when it's not. Can you comment on which ones apply to which kinds of changes?
So for the changes that are allowable under a suitability petition, all changes except strength changes would trigger PREA and require a waiver request within that suitability petition. Any strength change in a suitability petition does not require a PREA waiver as it's not triggered. So that hopefully that clarifies your question. So if you have a strength change, if you're proposing a strength change in a suitability petition, you do not require a PREA waiver because PREA would not be triggered.
When it is required, when you sometimes waive, but 7% of the time
yes.
you don't.
Yes. So now thank you for clarifying. So, but the waiver requests are handled internally at the FDA. There's a committee that individually evaluates each request. That committee is comprised of pediatricians, regulatory experts, just to ensure that if that proposed change is going to be likely used in a pediatric population, that's one kind of trigger they use, whether something would require additional pediatric studies. If the product is not anticipated to be used or kind of unlikely to be used in a pediatric population, those are indicators where the waiver could be approved. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Fine. Corey, back to you. We have just about 3 minutes.
Of course. These next questions, this one will be for Heather. So is there a penalty if we do not send notice on the same day that we provide PIV certification to a later listed patent?
So no, well, the regulation does not describe a penalty if the applicant does not send it on the same day.
Excellent. Thank you for that. This next question is for Truong, and it is, how do you contact the Division of Orange Book Publication and Regulatory Assessment?
You can contact via email, which is orangebook at fda.hhs.gov.
Okay. I know, we're squeezing in so many now. Then we'll come back to you, Truong. The current available form, FDA 3542, is expired. What form should we currently use?
Actually, we just published the unexpired form. So, but in general, please always use the current form that is on the form FDA form website, even though if it's expired or not, just use that current form.
One more? Okay. So this one will go to Rosie. What constitutes a complete petition for the purposes of starting the 6-month clock? And what are the most common reasons petitions are found incomplete, requiring an information request?
So a complete petition will include all the sections as outlined in the section for citizen petitions, because suitability petitions are a type of citizen petition. And so those sections were mentioned in the presentation, and it's also found in 21 CFR 1030. But in addition to those requirements, there's a couple other things that are required, and those are listed in 21 CFR 314.93. These are specifically for suitability petitions. So you'll need to identify the reference listed drug, provide a copy of the RLD labeling, a copy of the proposed labeling for the proposed drug product, and then if PREA is triggered, a waiver request to waive the requirements under PREA. And usually if those are the items that are missing, the ones that are related to suitability petitions. If we find that something is missing, the Division of Filing Review will issue an information request. And then once that response is received, we'll complete the completeness assessment and issue a correspondence indicating your GDF goal date for the petition.
Thank you very much, Rosie. A big hand of applause to our panelists, please.